This is capitalism's trump card. It encourages creativity and empathy and puts them at the service of the wants and the needs of the people. The inequality the socialist left despises isn't created by the entrepreneur, it's created by us. The proud boast of democratic socialism is that it puts the people in charge of the economy. What control do you have over the post office or the DMV? We vote in elections every 2 or 4 years, but as consumers, we exercise our choices daily, directly through the market. The free market is far more reflective of popular consent than democratic socialism. We don't have to extend democracy from the political to the economic sphere because, in many ways, we already have it. Capitalism, not socialism, is the true form of social justice. Welcome to Keith Knight Don't Tread on Anyone. Today we have Michael Tsarion. He is an independent researcher, teacher, filmmaker. Check out his excellent film, Architects of Control. You'll see 3 links to his website, as well as that movie in the links in the description. Mr. Tsarion, thank you for your time, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Keith. It's nice to be on with you. Looking forward to this.
What is freedom?
Well, that's an interesting thing. That my approach is always that it's never given to us politically. It's always something that is first given unto ourselves by ourselves. So that sort of changes gear and takes us into more of a, hey, not just a psychological iteration, but maybe even a philosophical iteration. So it's a combination of those things, and then the kind of freedom that we might find as a citizen of a culture or a country, that then is a derivative of that. So the real thing is something that you give yourself. Ayn Rand talked about, she's one of my big mentors, spoke about a thing called psychoepistemology. There's an ugly term for you, but when broken down, it's actually a very beautiful thing. It's the, for her, the rational man, the man who's in true contact with reality, knows that he has a mind. Obviously, that's given unto us, that we are self-reflexive enough to know we've got a consciousness and got a mind. But as far as she was concerned, not everybody values the existence and presence of mind or thought. We just think, we just do. And she noticed, some of the beauty of her work is that she noticed, and this would apply very much to socialists as well, by the way, she would notice that certain people actually, if you just peel off the surface, they actually don't value their minds and consciousness. You won't see that unless you look very closely, but her philosophy is grounded in it, that the psychoepistemology, psycho is mind, is the ability to think and have consciousness. But yeah, that's the mechanical aspect. Behind all the thinking and the doing and the acting and the emotions and the reason, is there actually an epistemology there where you value that you are that kind of being? And as far as she was concerned, no, there's not. So her masculine, sort of archetype was somebody who not only thinks like everybody else, but it's already coming from a comportment of valuation and respect and a kind of a gratitude, for the act of thinking. Now, she's not the only one there. That can be found in other philosophers too. But it's vital. I don't care who the philosopher is, right wing, left wing, in the middle. This is vital. And she brought it to the fore more so that it would be crucial, because it had lapsed. Other people who had spoken this way didn't speak enough. It was implicit in their philosophy, but it wasn't, writ large. In Ayn Rand, it is writ large. And then that's what makes sense then of future comments that she has about reason, the rational man, trusting in your reason and all that. But it's all based in the psychoepistemology. And that's where I look then to answer questions like that about freedom. The stuff that's given to, down the line by, a king, a warlord, a governor, a political party, can be taken away just as quickly. You can find yourself in the dungeon, at one point, or you can find yourself, in a quite libertarian world. But that can change in a heartbeat. Is that where you put your freedom? Merely in a political context or sphere? Not good enough, says Rand. You have to be able to attribute it to yourself. And with that comes a value of freedom and a value of the thinking process, which is rooted in freedom.
And what is socialism, and why do you oppose socialism?
Well, I think that that is because socialism is just a catchphrase, really. It's a very useless term, The Nazis have used it, the communists have used it, Swedish Democrats, and will use it even on occasion. It's just a sociological term, but unfortunately, when you start to unpack it, the short answer is that it's really a kind of collectivism. And then this is a collectivism is still okay. It's only collectivism in the extreme sense of when anything collective, right, starts to exist because it's based in the erasure of a kind of the selfhood that we spoke about just a minute ago. And this, of course, can be proven. Even a socialist can see that they don't value their own minds. They value what the herd thinks, or what the leader thinks, right, or what I've been taught in school. And if you study the life of a socialist, you will find that there's almost no independent thinking there at all. It's and also no valuation underneath it, the more important aspect, because it's not that conservatives can't go wrong in their thinking. Of course they do. It's not that, the liberal guy, who's, I'm just, try to do as much good as I can in the world. Yeah, his thinking can go wrong as well. I've known people who are, you're sort of camera eye communists. You're sort of a flag waving socialists where they're brutes at home. They tell on the in public they want to talk about how wonderfully socialist the world should be, and then they're beating their wives and kids, mercilessly when the door is closed. I've seen teachers like that. So the socialist is really one who's abnegated the kind of things we've already addressed: abnegated value, abnegated reason, abnegated individualism. And there are such people, and when they gather together, they create societies. It's not that I'm against liberalism. Liberalism in the British sort of context is that's nothing wrong with that at all. If that was all we had to deal with, we'd be really with some very logical and well-meaning humanitarian people. Right? The socialism, as we've known it, in most of its darker iterations, is very far from that.
What are Western values?
Well, that's really a story of ancient history, actually, right? Because although there's been great liberal movements in what we would call the Age of Enlightenment and all the rest of it, I really think myself, and I could be wrong here, but because there's a great argument here, but I think that they start way back in time. I think they start when we were tribal, really, and that the ones that we see in a more sort of urbanized environment are just kind of later iterations, and you pass through Thomas Hobbes, and you pass through Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So there's a lot of modifications as we move up to now. But the real values are something that is set in Anglo-Saxon consciousness, which is the value of independence. Because if you actually go back and study other groups that are not, Western, you won't find that. You still don't find it, right? Or you only find a sort of a veneer of feeling of independence. People are much more likely, say, in Eastern climes and Middle Eastern climes, to not be able to think outside the box, to sacrifice themselves for family, and I mean dutifully, like a servile creature. And also their tendency, and I have also studied this, so I feel that the Anglo-Saxon, the spirit, let's put it this way, the spirit or the consciousness of the Anglo-Saxon mind and the Western mind is more motivated by the question of individualism. It comes to bear. Now, it's got highly contaminated. It is by no means a pure, phenomena. But at least in the West, there has been that question of independence as an individual, as apart from his collective. Now, it's got sullied endlessly. Every time it sort of popped its head up, it immediately got dethroned, or immediately got contaminated, with the various Christian groups, or the Puritans, or the sort of the kind of puritanicalness of these different groups. And you also find it in, say, the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons. All sorts of these groups, again, sort of disfavor individualism and independence. And, again, created a very sort of collectivistic model. And we're still fighting it today, as far as I'm concerned. So those values are there, but I still think it's early days because of this lack of psychoepistemology. What would be the point of even a very high civilization trying to teach you or instill in you something that isn't natural to yourself, right? So when all the structures are collectivistic, how can we expect a young man or young girl, young boy, or somebody even in college to develop the level of individualism we're talking about right now? So it becomes a lot of window dressing that a society can put on. We're independent, we're free, we're capitalistic, we're this. But if you dig down deep, you don't actually find any of that at all. This is one of the dangers, I think.
Now, Vladimir Putin was very critical of individualism, saying the Americans or individualist ideologies care about one person. individual, one, themselves. So it's selfish. We believe in collectivism, which is much more caring. Now, my understanding is that the individualist sees a million people and says that is a million individuals with a million different ends who all deserve to be treated respectively. Whereas the collectivist sees them as one blob. If we have to kill some to save others, well, then we're just doing the well being of the group. How would you respond to the Putin mindset of the individualist is morally inferior because it's selfish?
Yeah, well, first of all, I wouldn't debate with anyone. I would chat like we're doing right now. It's sort of
Yeah,
off the point. I wouldn't
yeah.
sit down with any of these people. To me, they're so far gone that argument is just wasted on them, right? Because socialism, if you dig down deep, it is really an infection. It's an aberration of consciousness on the absolute basic level. You know, what some psychologists would call semiotic. I mean, pre-conscious. So there's no way outside of actual coercion that you'd fix them. And then we have to go, do I want to be a coercive kind of person? When you go, no. So you then the best thing, freedom means freedom, leave them to themselves. But as long as they don't violate the rights of others. But we see but then you deal with the psychology of the drip feed. They have drip fed the society. So society doesn't have any combatancy against these aberrant ideas because we loathe ideas. Right. This is the crazy thing. There's a lot of this infection. That's why socialism as an entity even rose at all. It rose in the West. It didn't rise in the East. It parallels Eastern collectivism, but it rose as a phenomena in the West. And although they have great champions to fight it, unfortunately, it's gained ground over the years. And that's an incredible story how that happened. But to your point, they are very cunning at trying to demonize, what we talk about when we mean individualism. Those who espouse individualism, including Rand and others, never, excuse me, never doubt that what we call self is self in participation, right? So already the collectivist is shorthanding us. Everything's in sound bites, so their agents dominate the media, dominate. So anyone that calls themselves a socialist usually is fairly lowbrow, right? I've always believed that they're socialistic as a philosophy or whatever you might call it is really pretty much threadbare. It doesn't hold up. It only holds up in these sound bites or if you have an inadequate, counter voice. And even when you've got a very adequate counter voice in the form of just say something like Milo or something like Jordan Peterson, whatever, and I mean him in all small caps actually. But then they don't give that person the time, and there's all sorts of other techniques to silence that person. But when you cut all away that stuff and you see the chicanery that they never really let you speak, this thing is resolved very, very quickly. All of these espousers of socialism misinterpret or misrepresent the case. Ayn Rand and anyone we could talk about who's a espouser, right, of individualism obviously is speaking about man in participation with others. And man in participation with civilization. Mitwelt is the German word, right? And you are so, entwined and entangled with Mitwelt that it's actually ludicrous ever to speak, except in pure theory, of a self as a completely distinct objective being. And then if you started to do, say you had a mishandling of the thing and you started to do that, that doesn't lead anywhere because you'll end up in a Cartesian paradox in which that argument now becomes that man, in the Cartesian way, is completely separate, utterly from what's called objectified reality, that other people and entities are now completely objectified. And you can easily turn around and say, well, there's Ayn Rand's philosophy. You call it objectivism, right? Or whatever. No, see, immediately things become very, very false there. By no means did people like Rand mean that you are this Cartesian entity sitting above as a spectator into any kind of world that's extended from you but separate from you. That's absolutely false. She took for granted the embeddedness in culture, that man is embedded in culture. So right off the bat, you see, the socialist is going to try and tell you that you're some imperious, present you as some person who imperiously is speaking about this mysterious ontological self, as if there is some sort of such entity. when in fact that is not the case. So that's how I would go at it. I would never sit down politically with them to discuss that on the political front. I would have to bring in the philosophy of subjecthood, selfhood, empathic resonance, which is the things that bring about a society or a culture.
So, my next question is sort of similar. I'm not necessarily asking if you were debating, Neil deGrasse Tyson's going to be my example, but how you would communicate to the mindset of a well-meaning person who might say something like this. So, Neil deGrasse Tyson is on the Jim and Sam show, and he said, don't get me wrong, the government's always up to something. The government's always trying to keep a secret. The question is, well, they succeed in keeping the secret of, stockpiling it. Look at how much we know about President Clinton's genitalia. If there was ever a state secret, it would have been what he does with, where he puts it. So, I'm curious how you would respond to the mindset of what maybe there are some conspiracies, but even the deepest ones, like between Clinton and Lewinsky, we find out about them. How would you respond to that?
Oh, it's true to a point. Yes, there are plenty of watchdog groups. There's plenty of investigative journalists out there. So absolutely, there's even the regular media. So of course, what a person does, but will often come to light. And some of them are very blasé, like Clinton in the White House. These are egomaniacal psychopaths who've left a trail of disaster, from Mena, Arkansas onwards. Over 45 deaths, etc. So of course, some of the blasé ones, it's and then they have falling outs within themselves, and somebody goes and blows the whistle. We have that right now happening. So you have that every year, and you have criminal investigation, and you have brilliant investigative journalists. But again, it's selective to that point. That doesn't mean then that other more sinister conspiracies, like the presence of deep state or whatever it might be, or a phenomenon like, say, Islamo-communism, right, which I deal with a lot, that anyone knows the rudiments of that. In fact, even when it comes to the Puritan groups we mentioned earlier, at the time of the 1700s, 17th century, does anybody really know about, how blood-soaked those groups are? Or say, the Mormon prophet, that you're dealing with a gang, a murderous gang in the same way of a mafia. They played. I don't know why you wouldn't know that. So then you meet with cognitive dissonance. So conspiracy theory suddenly becomes, more conspiracy stroke psychology theory, because you're dealing with cognitive dissonance. You're not dealing with the fact that the evidence isn't there. You're dealing with the fact that it is there, but nobody wants to look behind that veil. And, I think that is a huge, huge aspect. And it comes with the whole idea of not really being in contact with reality, being in contact with an idea of reality. It all ties together, right? And so this disconnect, that even if you brought up something quite mild, right, like British Army collusion with the Provisional IRA, completely documented. The top generals of the British Army have written it in their memoirs. Did it get abroad? That these Jerry Adams and all are not what they appear to be? No. Everybody just, So even even a one that you think would be quite palatable and would explain a lot. No, not even the victims of groups like the Provisional IRA are willing. Oh my God, we've got a key piece here, because of the fear of being a conspiracy theorist, right? So you see, it's something you have to take the deep plunge into, and there's a risk. You can become back crazy, like so many people in this movement, who call themselves conspiracy theorists. It's hard to stay rational, but at the same time, I think it's always worth it. I think it's worth it to look behind the veil and be able to deal with truth. That there is truth out there, truth about AIDS, how that got created, or wars that may have happened throughout history. I've never seen a problem as why you would not want to know the etiology of things like that. I don't even think of myself as a conspiracy theorist or anything like that. I'm an interested person who's got a high interest in history, perhaps a little bit of the obscure material, whatever, but it's never been outside just an intellectual study, actually.
In the last chapter of Virtue of Selfishness, Ayn Rand has a chapter called The Argument from Intimidation, where it's just you just disapprove of someone, and that's in exchange of an argument. It's not anything assisting intellectual exchange. So it is the perfect example when you go, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. Okay. I mean, that's not an actual response. It's sort of like you wouldn't want to think that spouses are most likely the culprit in a crime where the other spouse dies or is killed mysteriously. But that's just the reality when you look into criminology. And when you look
Mm.
into history, it's just a story of some groups conspiring at the cost of others. Now, I mean, America is founded on a conspiracy to violently overthrow the government. Even the official story is like a conspiracy. What are some
Yep.
proven conspiracies that you would point to just show someone, hey, here is an actual example of something that's happened. So don't tell me this doesn't happen.
Oh, there's so many. This is the most extraordinary thing. From somebody can take it from almost a banal, or Elvis was seen alive. Paul McCartney is really dead. The real, you can go from that level, which is your National Enquirer level, mildly interesting, up until much grander, to the top level, like the fall of the Ottoman Empire, the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and everything in between. The killing of the Tsar and his family. Um, and all the different uh, all of the different ones that say accuse Jesuits or accuse Masons, right? And you can, there's any way to come at this. You can come in from a really extreme right wing Catholic version, like Father Coughlin did, and Father what's his name? Oh, yeah, can't remember right now. Another father who wrote several actually really good books exposing what he considered, the conspiracy, right? And then you can come in from the Jewish side, or you can come in from the Masonic side. So there's all sorts of conspiracies, and each one needs to be taken independently. Excuse me. Like I was saying about the IRA, you can just take, and groups like that, you can just say, they founded together, they became active in 1979, let off a lot of bombs in Ireland, caused a lot of havoc, and killed a lot of people. Or you can say, no, this is a secret society. Originally, it was called the Irish Republican Brotherhood, a branch of, say, the ancient order of Hibernians. Well, who are they when they're home? And then, the whole thing about the Molly Maguires and, the cover organizations for these groups. And before you know it, you're in the conspiracy, right? And so there's many ways of coming at it. But each case, so you asked for an example. I would say, let's look at the leaders of the, Irish socialistic groups, like your Eamon de Valera. Just start right there. Or somebody like Sir Roger Casement, the big names, the ones who were motivated to bring in guns, bring in weapons. Start there. That's where I started. That will lead you in various other directions. Sometimes into ancient Irish history, sometimes just into the symbolism that they're using. Ask yourself, why, where this order came from. Why was it called a brotherhood? That's very Masonic sounding. The Sinn Féin origins, right? That looks very Masonic. And so you just go step by step by step. And I believe the evidence is already there. The evidence is already there. It's not propaganda created by anybody. It's documented fact that these groups are very, very interesting. And then you compare. Why did Mahatma Gandhi, one of the greatest rebel leaders in the world, say that when you fight against an oppressor, you cannot take anything from that oppressor? That's why he went around in a loincloth and what's called a dhoti, right, which was hand-spun cotton. That's why they made their own salt from the sea, right? They went down to the sea and they made their own salt. And the premise was repeated again and again by this leader. Not that I agree with everything Mahatma Gandhi said. I'm just illustrating something here. And that is that if you're going to throw off an oppressor, then you can't with one hand say I'm against you, and with the other hand be taking foodstuffs or anything else from you. Well, let's compare that to the mighty leaders of the IRA, all of whom were on the British dole, all of whom were taking national assistance, all who didn't live in the south but lived in the north where the assistance was forthcoming, whereas if they lived in the south, they'd be penniless. Wow, that's very, very interesting, isn't it? Suddenly these wonderful leaders, with one hand telling you that they're against the British Army, the royal family, and all the sundry, but their wives and their households are receiving checks from that same government. See, most other people would just reject that and not think about that or give that a thought. I, on the other hand, find that extremely fascinating and interesting because it makes me feel that there's duplicity in the minds of those leaders. Right? I'm not convinced anymore that these are real people's champions. I certainly wouldn't want to follow them. And then when you find out that they're nothing but mass murderers, I think that would add a bit too. Right? So it's just about the kind of mind. But it's the same thing with everything. If Elvis is meant to be alive, let's go and check out if you use this credit card or what at the ATMs or whatever, So you immediately start going and you do what is needed. In every single case, it starts off small, and then suddenly you got a big elephant in the room. And then if you want to go on and talk to the public and alert them to that, that's a whole other journey right there. Because I believe there's many conspiracy theorists and people who studied very deeply, but they haven't written books about it. Or they've been hesitant. People like Greg Hallett would be a good example there. He finally did write a book, but you can tell it was very, very hesitant. Maybe because he didn't have the forte, or he wasn't really that inclined, or it was a personal study. So there can be conspiracy theorists who know what they know, and they write anonymously, or they even come on YouTube with a sort of a handle. You don't see their faces, whatever it might be, or they just don't publish at all. And then there's this whole other wing of this, a whole other component of this, where you have made a career of shaking people by the shoulders and going, you've got to listen to this, you've got to listen to that. So there's really two different kinds of conspiracy theorists, actually.
Yeah, and then I love when people sort of stumble on accidentally. They'll be like, huh, it's interesting. The official Benghazi story is a lie. And actually, they were sending weapons to Turkey. And actually, they were funding Islamists to overthrow Assad in Syria with those weapons. Isn't that odd? Isn't that weird? It's like, well, no, they've been funding the Mujahideen since Reagan and Carter in the 80s. They did it in Bosnia. Now they're doing it in Syria and Libya. So even when it's right in front of your face, people still are like, well, but you can't say that there's bad motives behind it. That it's still hard to get into that mindset. Any final thoughts on the mind of conspiracy theorizing, or why you think it is the proper way to analyze many situations in the world?
Well, I think that came out of inevitability, because if you look at the world system, it's been made, maybe it is complex, but it's been made extra complex in the way that's presented, duplicity by teachers and other encyclopedists or pundits or whatever. And so it's sort of a little bit carry on what I just said. If you doubt a talking head, say you see them every night, Ted Koppel, Walter Cronkite, the British versions of such and such, and suddenly you keep finding that they're catching them in lies. There's just one answer to your question. And then you find out further, he's a member of this weird, what's it called? The Bohemian Society? What's that? And then or Masonic Royal Archmasonry or Scottish Rite Masonry. And you find this out because you picked up a book one day that said that. Your faith in that Bob Geldof or in this Bono creature, right? Or like I said, one of these more familiar talking heads, you have just had your perception of that person shattered as a teacher or as a pundit, somebody that can be trusted now. And so I think that creates a disenchantment with, right, that breaks down your trust. And should you find that out later on, say from a figure as as auspicious as, say, Winston Churchill, that his books are full of lies, his history of the world is nonsense, or a Bertrand Russell or an H.G. Wells or somebody else that you held in great esteem, right? I think that this then causes such a rut, right, that automatically you need to prop it up by sort of what we're calling the conspiratorial, view of life. It helps to keep the props in, otherwise the whole thing collapses. So then a mind, even against their own resistance, are going to say, well, there are alternatives. Here's a historian I haven't heard, Arthur Bryant, or here's Antonio Ludovici, or here's, another thinker. Or I'm going to open my mind, so I'm hearing the other side a bit more than I used to be before, when my world was certain, right? So the uncertainty of modernity, which created bizarre art as well, created bizarre music and all of that, your sort of Stravinsky, your deconstruction of a lot of norms, all of this is coming with the post-Nietzschean mode. And I'm for it. I am absolutely for it, because we're here to talk about mentors. Man, how would we get an Otto Rank? How would we get a Thomas Zaz? All of the people I would cite, including Ayn Rand, as people who motivated me, are people who answer that disenchantment, who are able to see the phoenix coming out of the fires. And that's why I go, breathless trying to talk about those characters, because I know everyone needs it. I know that, it will restore your faith in a way, faith in humanity, faith in that there is still a reality principle back of everything.
Now, I want to get into a number of your mentors that I found. If I'm wrong and these people haven't motivated you, just let me know and we'll skip them. What is the most important thing you learned from the work of Anthony Sutton?
Oh, yeah. Mo, wow. A quick answer to that is one, that his Skull and Bones group that he seems to have focused on, because they tried to solicit him, so he turned them down and he went to study who they were. Except he had access to the Hoover Institute and other institutes that only certain people can get access to. So his study just looms then very large, more than the average well-meaning Catholic priest, or like I said, or somebody else who's just a sort of a low-level journalist. They've all done beautifully work. They've done well, but this is of another octave altogether because he was an insider. He could get access. He could get interviews with people of his own eminence that normally would go, oh yeah, close the door on a normal journalist. And if there's anything second to that, it's the scope. It's the absolute. We need people like that. We need a John Coleman. We need an Anthony Sutton to say it's not just a little Masonic thing happening, down the street, which a couple of investigative journalists can have as a headline, in the Washington Post for all of a week, and that's it. No, this is bigger than Watergate. This is bigger than any gate. This is the world conspiracy. And that scope is very, very vital. Otherwise, people get lost. Another false shadow play, mirror play is in it's just something we can tidy up. It's just, some liberal Democrat, Republican thing, some left versus right thing that crops up. And that has cropped up. There, a very great many of the conspiracies are of that level and can be knocked on the head with, the right kind of policing and the right kind of exposure. What Anthony Sutton brings up is this is huge. You want to know why a communist Russia got created, a Soviet bloc? We're talking about that now. So the grandiosity, of what he talked about, I think is vital there with Anthony. Yeah, definitely.
So, books you would recommend: America's Secret Establishment, his Skull and Bones research, and what are the other books or papers of his that you'd recommend?
Oh, there's many. The Wall Street, right? He went into the Wall Street issue. Um, he went into the whole anatomy of Bolshevism, how it's funded by the so-called capitalists.
Yeah.
So he has a key piece there. They're not capitalists, of course. Once you've digested, they're rich socialists. Big difference. Even that piece hasn't sunk in the 21st century. That there's a monumental difference between a true capitalist, in the Randian sense, or that kind of sense, and a super rich socialist. In the shape of a Bono
Or
a
Friedrich
George Soros.
Engels, the guy funding Marx, is
Yeah,
is a rich
precisely.
socialist. Back to the very beginning. You don't even have to go to Jacob Schiff or any of these other guys. So, Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, America's Secret Establishment. You said he did some work on the Masons, did you say?
Well, in the
Or
sense that derivatively, as he was doing his Skull and Bones thing, but didn't he
oh,
do?
okay.
Didn't he do? What's the one? Trilaterals over America.
Trilaterals over Washington. That's right.
Washington,
Yeah.
yeah, the
Yeah.
Trilateral Society. Another important piece, because remember, like John Coleman, G. Edward Griffin, and Anthony Sutton, those three go together well. And there are other names like Dan Smoot and others, but those three stand encyclopedically because, and let's add Eustace Mullins into that. So make it four great authors who show you the connections to the Royal London Institutes and the American organizations. That piece is so vital that if you miss it, you won't have a vision. So how London, Tavistock, Royal Institute of International Affairs, right, your Chatham Houses, and basically the British Round Table groups and structures, which is a huge, huge network, how they impact America's destiny. That is why those four authors are absolutely essential.
Now, I know you spoke about her earlier, but I love hearing you talk about Ayn Rand. What are some of the most important things you learned from Ayn Rand?
How to think. What is really of value? She gave me the psychoepistemology I was speaking about earlier. Instead of going about in the dark with this placard and that placard and this opinion and that opinion, and you're not in contact at all, with reality. Her first, at 14, I'd seen The Fountainhead, the film, and I'd copied out by hand, wrote out the speech at the end, right? The famous Howard Rourke speech in court. Kept that with me wherever I went. Didn't understand half of it, but it just sounded beautiful. And the power of the film, really struck me. And then in 1991, when I was about maybe around 24, something like that, I picked up one of her books, Philosophy Who Needs It, and read that. Now, right, it was more clear. Something that it implicitly, characterologically had aligned with and supported. Now it was more clear philosophically what she was. It wasn't as daunting. I just totally gelled with that book, and I recommend that book as a starting place for a lot of people who are new into her philosophy, who needs it, and then move from that point. So basically, she gave me to realize the value of having a mind, which is an ontological starting point. You're free then to do what you want with it later, but at least discover that a mind is a valuable thing. It's a tool, yes, yes, yes. But instead of just thinking and just emoting, right, and just talking about reason and all of that, celebrate it. Really, really, really inhale the fact that this is a valuable thing that man thinks. Not just what he's thinking about, but that he can think. And that is, Brandon and her called that a shift in your cognition. Your reason isn't the same as another person. You become superior to those other people. From a personality, behavioristic point of view, there is a difference. And those who think without valuing thought, they're of a different grade. And these are all unpalatable ideas right now. They're all anti-PC, but so what? They turn out to be the things that make a man. It's like when did Conan Doyle say that mediocrity knows nothing higher than itself, but talent can always recognize genius. So she is talking about the genius type and the talented type who go on to build a civilization, not the mediocrities. That's why her philosophy is very unpopular amongst people, especially socialists.
What is the some of the most important things you learned from Yuri Bezmenov?
Yeah, again, his work is more supportive. It's not. It's not original, because anybody who'd already been, like growing up in Britain, the Cambridge spies, he grew up with all. My dad was a Marxist, so he had a major meltdown when the Kim Philbys, and Anthony Blunts. So people have been following a little bit, through the 70s, the 60s, the sort of John le Carre, conspiracy world, which is brilliant, and he exposed, or say Robert Ludlum and all. It wasn't such a great discovery that KGB defectors existed, or that when they defected, they told the truth about, what was going on behind the Soviet bloc. And your Stanton Evans, who's a monumental character, American writer. And even before him, you have your Senator Joe McCarthy, right? So it's not that Yuri's work is in any way sort of original to that degree, but it is highly supportive, on a beta level, which is still vital, to support from inside, because we get so much flack as being conspiracy theorists that you're empty, you get nothing better to do, where's your National Enquirer, mate, where's your tinfoil hat? That when a senior KGB operative who's lived in very, very difficult, has had assassination, things out on his head and all of that, speaks with such monumental authority, I think it's absolutely wonderful. So in a supportive way, I'd say that Yuri Bezmenov is a very important character.
What are some of the most important things you learned from State Senator John DeCamp?
Yeah, well, wow, we're moved into the deep waters here. Again, not that anyone didn't know, right, that pedophilia, child abduction, child sex rings wasn't going on. There's been many who've spoken of that from way back. But again, having a major senator, like you had Gary Allen, in the politics, and major figures in the church, and major breakaway people like Father Alberto Rivera, and all of that. So, and especially for me, because my work always focuses, not just a little bit like other people do, but it is majorly dependent upon a very sort of highbrow type. Not that I've not added a lot of my own thought to that, as I've done with all the authors I study, but yeah, it is dependent on those. And so this say John DeCamp's exposures, although again not original, right, are immensely important in the wider story of very dark satanic organizations operative right today in the American milieu, behind entertainment, behind rock, behind country and western, behind that monstrosity, of just Hollywood TV. Some stuff is leaked out. Yeah, great. That's tip of the iceberg. And if you put a book like that in front of people, more likely they're going to listen and go, I'll take that up now. You convinced me, mate. Lieutenant Bo Greitz, Ted Gunderson, chiefs in the FBI and people of that ilk. Yeah, makes my job a lot easier.
Oh, yeah. For people unfamiliar, he wrote a book called The Franklin Cover Up, and it all came about after he said, people are saying that there's some, ring. This is ridiculous. I'd need to see the facts. I'm waiting to hear the whistleblower. And then a guy named Paul Benassi writes him a letter from jail saying, I'll tell you all about the ring that I'm a part of. So he called his bluff. And then this senator was kind and open minded enough to keep his word and interview the guy. And he says all this stuff that the media was misreporting, but was able to be verified. So we have an extremely reliable source that Noreen Gosh used to get information on her son. So we could get information about, I don't want to say who they thought it was, but yeah, and then Ted Gunderson. Yeah, John DeCamp was just so good on all that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, what are some of the most important things you learned from the work of Thomas Sowell?
I don't know that much about Thomas Sowell's work. Everything I've seen, I like, and I've always meant to get more into it. And again, what I always hear is more supportive of what people say in the Mises Institute or others I've read say. And he's come, like a Charles Murray would, wonderful stuff supporting. See, there's a lot of support. There's core information, and then those who come from eminent places to support it. And I love that, actually. I love the fact that you get them in the highest areas of sport or journalism or the Hoover Institute, right? And so this was this dream come true to find that so many eminent people actually are corroborating, like Pearl Harbor or, the World War Wars or, Pat Buchanan would be another name, right? And so it's not that there's absolutely tons of original work in there. For a conspiracy theorist, that's often not the case. I mean, there are exceptions, right? But generally speaking, a conspiracy theorist recognizes the content of these people's work, but is glad to have a modern iteration of it. Because remember, some of our fathers in this movement are all passed on already, like Eustace Mullins and others and Ezra Pound. So we don't want to then run threadbare. That would be awful, So having some sort of Ann Coulter types and Thomas Sowell types, Ron Pauls and all, it's all good. It's goose, it's perfectly fine. Sauce for the goose, it's great. We need all the support we can get. We don't want people falling away and then their reputations and their notoriety being completely forgotten. That can happen.
And what about Joseph McCarthy? Any original contributions or anything that just was brought to light as a causal result of you looking into him?
Yeah, many things there. I would certainly recommend Stanton Evans, M. Stanton Evans, just to celebrate the man himself, let alone Joe McCarthy, a wonderful patriot. He's original. Now he moves up from the betas to the alphas because he and his group, obviously he had other people around him, they went up against the establishment first. An establishment that wasn't as pleasant as this is the 50s, right? Oh my goodness, one has to only look at the, fate of somebody like Wilhelm Reich and a lot of others. So yeah, I mean, come on, this is a guy who really took them on, called them out, named the names. And so for an American person who's interested in the secret history of America, this is almost the starting place. And then the diatribes that were fired at him, all of which were completely preposterous, is another good place to start. That'll show you what you're up against. It's the same thing, say, if you were into, slightly in a different gear, the work of Immanuel Velikovsky. What a place to start. And the attacks that were levied on him, you see. So in the political sphere, Joe McCarthy would be one of those people. You not only find out what he had to say, which is extremely accurate, but then the welter of the blowback also puts you aware of what will happen to you if you deep throat the whole thing, right? So wonderful, wonderful patriot, yeah.
Yeah, the Venona Papers, I think they're called, were like the actual documents confirming everything he said so many
Mm,
years later. I think it was
yeah.
349 communists in the State Department, Harry Dexter White, Laughlin Curry, Alger Hiss, the Rosenbergs. But he's still seen as this villain. Meanwhile, we'll get into those people later. Uh,
Alan Dulles, the Dulles brothers.
Yeah, certainly. What are some of the most important contributions or things you learned from Robert Welsh from the John Burke Society?
Yeah, superb patriot again. And I was introduced to that through the work of G. Edward Griffin. I had heard vaguely of the John Birch Society, but didn't join myself because, unfortunately, after coming out of Ireland, Northern Ireland, and this is just a foible, right? But I've always had a feeling, if you want to call it that, that all these right-wing groups, of which I completely support, are infiltrated by the enemy. And I'm an outsider in America, have a green card, all the rest of it. The last thing I want to do is be deported when I've just got to the place, right? So the hard facts of that was, as much as I would have loved to go and actually actively support, yeah, but I'm not an American yet. I can't vote yet, right? All of these things. And why put a target on your back? So just out of self-preservation, ideologically, I was aligned with these groups, and they've been around a lot longer than me. So, my contribution isn't that crucial. So I just had to stay back a little bit, partly from this rational fear of knowing that these organizations have been thoroughly, what's the word, infiltrated by communists. So I just had nothing to, and then, because of my status in the country, being very patriotic at the same time, I just knew that, look, as much as I'd love to join some of these patriotic groups, it's really not logical to do that coming out of Northern Ireland. If you came out of Southern Ireland, where the person is much more favored because they're Republican, they're socialistic, they're collectivistic, and they may even be tied in with Jesuits and stuff like that. So they get more green cards handed to them. This is back in the 70s, you see. They get more favor. People in the north of Ireland don't. So to get into America, to get a green card and all, was very, very, lucky, all that. So I just didn't want to compromise. But yeah, Robert Welch and the whole group, support their work, stuff I've listened to all the time. I've got books of their memoir. I'm reading one now, a masterpiece by the leader of the John Birch Society now. So it's just, and I'm plowing through that work. So I think they're an extremely brilliant resource, and I do recommend that people support them.
What's the some of the most important contributions from Pat Buchanan?
Well, I like his writings. He's not perfect, but I'll tell you one thing. His book, I've always been studying the Second World War, especially the duplicity of Winston Churchill. So his book, Churchill, The Unnecessary War. It's called The Unnecessary War, Churchill, Hitler, blah, 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 right? Subtitle. What a book. That book definitely contains original stuff. And if even the material there, if it isn't original, some of it, you won't find it elsewhere, because I know I've read so much. So to find what he's put there, and not just him, but he's got a team, the research that team has done and he himself has done makes that book one of the most important books of the 20th and 21st century. So just that book alone, not even the rest of his work, just that book alone contains extraordinary information that must be made part of the narrative. I'm not a fan of Hitler. I don't buy into anyone who tries to minimize the role, right, of Adolf Hitler or make him into some kind of paragon. There are people within the conspiracy movement who do that. I am certainly not one of them, right? But at the same time, what do we know about the equally aberrant characters in Romania, in Hungary, in Poland, in Czechoslovakia, whose decisions changed the fate of Europe? We always just want to look at one guy, or Mussolini and Hitler. Hitler and Mussolini, boy, that covers it. No, it doesn't. You had fiends, like Franco and all of these people, right? I want to know about them. And believe me, that book goes into it. So full marks.
How about the work of Sigmund Freud?
Yeah, I got a very high regard for Freud. I think he's one of the essential people that we spoke about earlier. That we're after the Nietzschean age. There'll be different kinds of free thought. There'll be different openings and avenues, different zeitgeists. Freud is essential in so many regards. Now, this is said even though I know all the imperfections and error. There is error in his work, right? Many of those were corrected later on, which will never be often told to you, by his daughter Anna Freud or his secretary Otto Rank and others. So a lot of those errors are really even not they're not as big a concern as some people make them, right? So there's a lot of duplicity when you come to Freud, a lot of duplicity. But that still doesn't mean that he had imperfections in his insights. And I talk in my work about what they are. There's really two that are hugely great errors in his work. But in general, he's essential. And even in terms of his sort of bestial rendering, he gets hammered by Christians and other people who don't know anything about him or his work. They'll hammer him because they'll say, well, that picture of man is a beast. We don't need to listen to anything else he says. Sure, that's not correct, right? And it actually isn't correct. They're right to that extent. But the thing that Freud was doing, if you'd read him more, is he wasn't actually really, he wasn't convinced that man was a beast. What he was doing was, he was continuing what Nietzsche and Schopenhauer had done, which is pull out all the plugs and let's have a reset so that we understand man without all that supernatural, angelly, fluffy stuff. I want to look at man, what now would be called phenomenologically, right? It's just look at man as he is of a day, in his dark dreams, his hatreds, his insecurities, right? His hang-ups, right? And I love that. I know, and I know why the others don't, because they still want that supernaturalism. They still want all that airy-fairy stuff. Like Nietzsche, he swept that away, and he wanted to see man as an existential being, part animal, after being at the head apex of the, what do they call it, the food chain and all. Yes, he did look at that, but that's not just because he had some rude understanding that man is a primitive beast that came out of a cave. That's a totally misunderstanding of that. What he was doing was an exercise in materialism, an exercise to materialize, to reductionism would be the better word. And as horrible as that sounds to people often, and in many ways is, the Freudian version of it has a lot of credibility and was thought out much more than just, I'm a raw materialist, don't tell me anything about. This is a man who meticulously studied religion. His father begged him for years to return to Judaism and he wouldn't do it, right? A man who had thoroughly studied inside out Greek culture, Egyptian culture, right? His first awards were given in the subject of history and anthropology, not psychology, right? So the man was really, what do you call it, a polymath. And then he's one like Hegel, who you cannot take down. He wins no matter what, because every time somebody tries to scream in Freud's face, Freud wins, because you'll see the Freudian slips and you'll see the Freudianism of why they're against Freud. Don't try to take on Freud, because the very things you're going to say will cycle back, and he goes, yeah, I told you so. You got those hang-ups, right? It's a mother thing. It's a father thing. Watch out when you start throwing darts at Freud, because they'll be pointing one finger and three pointing back. The man has understood your sublimations, your compensations, right? Your veiled compensations, the stuff that lies underneath. So, I love that. I think that's absolutely marvelous. And the main reason, to answer your question, is he brought introspection back, which the positivists, and many other of the Cartesian world either erased or were putting on a merely superficial level, right? He was, well, the two things. One, he brought introversion back as a necessary component of human dignity and existence and identity. And he showed, against Descartes and the whole rationalist school, you're not, as you think you are, in control of any of your behavior or your thinking or your awareness. That is massive. How can you then fiddle about with some smaller errors that the man made when he's handed you something so magnificent?
How about his excuse me, how about his nephew, Edward Bernays, who wrote a book? One is called Crystallizing Public Opinion. The other is just called Propaganda. The New York Times, when he died at 103, I think, called him the father of public relations. Have you read any of his work?
Oh, yeah, many times. And he is the father of public relations.
Yeah.
He's along with some other pretty awful characters. No, this was a very awful person who himself was a public relations officer for himself, his own image. And one of those things that he did to, enlarge his own persona was to keep citing that he was the nephew of Freud. So Freud had married a lady who was called Bernays. Her family name was Bernays, right? And so her brother or something, was the father of Edward Bernays. So the connections are fairly tenuous, and they're even more tenuous because Freud, as an ultra-conservative, would never, for multiple reasons, have endorsed anything that, in fact, it would have been so scurrilous, he would have recoiled utterly from any commentary about the mass mind or how to manipulate it. He wanted to liberate it, right? Not oppress it through subliminal techniques or persuasion or anything like this. If the man had still lived, I'm sure he would have taken a very big cane to his backside after Edward Bernays tried to, popularize, if that's even the, and especially in America, because Freud had written off America in no uncertain terms, in the most vitriolic way. Didn't care to follow the translations of the titles of his books, didn't care if any book of his was published in America, had made resounding no-nos about it, didn't help the APA, didn't help the Freudian Society. So Jung turned out to be the golden boy, the wonderful golden boy of America, with institutes springing up all over the place. Freud, as far as he was concerned, the place didn't even exist. His final statements were something like, they'll never get what I'm talking about anyway, so why are you all bothering? Yeah.
How about
and
the
he was
work?
serious. He was totally serious about that.
Yeah. How about the works of Carl Jung?
Yeah, well, they're essential. And I've had a long, very long love-hate relationship with the man as I picked through his work to see if there's any weaknesses and all the rest of it, right? And went on a journey of colossal proportions, labyrinthine journey to do that exact thing. So Jung plays a very big role in my life. Mostly a lot of hate in the 90s and saying, oh, no. But yeah, glorious, right? Incredible story there. Probably the only greater journey was studying Heidegger. It took me on a much more labyrinthine job, but taking out Heidegger, then the next Admundsen goes to the South Pole journey, was with Carl Jung to try and sort of play devil's advocate and disprove him. And I have a large dossier on that that's going to be into several, premium programs I'm doing on Slave down the line, where we go into all these fascinating details. However, at the end of that journey, I've come out supporting his work, not casting him aside or any of that. I actually think he was one of the greatest teachers and philosophers, but by God, have I gone through a full, dirty laundry investigation of the man to make that to myself, to verify. Because remember, although great he is, if you're a skeptic, well, he sits alongside a lot of very great people too, and he plagiarized a lot of them. There's huge chunks of Schopenhauer and Nietzsche uncredited in Jung's work. So it was thought like that. And they're not the only two I could cite. There's many others. Teilhard de Chardin. You have Gabriel Marcel. You've got so many thinkers around the man. You've got Kierkegaard, right? So I'm thinking originally, what's so big about Carl Jung? He just nicked a quarter of it from Freud, a little bit from Adler, a little bit from Rank. What's left? And all that archetype stuff, he got that from alchemy. He got that from Nicholas Cusa. He got that from Jakob Bohm, right? And all of that. And that's all true. So as you peel the man down to see if there's anything left, I was ambivalent. I thought, well, maybe there'll be nothing left except a stick insect, or maybe there'll be something substantial. Well, after the whole journey, as I repeat again, I come out full marks for Carl Jung all the way from the beginning to the end. Love his work.
And how about final philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche? The only time I had heard of him is when he was associated with National Socialism, and I had never heard extensive arguments. So I'm curious what the most important things you learned from his work is.
Many things. Not as great a teacher as Heidegger for me, but certainly or Marcel, but certainly vital. Without him. You see, I always think of him in along with. Well, you have to think along with Schopenhauer, but a little less known person, Karl Kraus. Right, the modern version of that would be Thomas Szasz. So I don't just think of Nietzsche. I think that what he did impacted what we know as psychiatry, sociology. So I don't think of him as a great philosopher, but as a cultural critic, in the same way that Szasz, Kraus is, and really a large part of Schopenhauer too. Schopenhauer's philosophy is so utterly bankrupt that maybe in time to come, it won't also be called a philosophy. And Nietzsche's, although not being bankrupt, isn't really also a it's not a philosophy, it's more psychology. And it's more sociology, a critique of people, a critique of consciousness, a critique of religion, and all of this. So very, very vital there. As to the Nazi thing, that had nothing to do with Friedrich Nietzsche himself. This was to do with his sister Elizabeth, who, when Nietzsche had gone mad, because he had gone and tried to save a horse from being beaten wildly, and it fell down into a stupor from which he never recovered. And there's been a lot of thoughts about why that happened and how it happened. My theory is that the horse jerked and physically hit his brain. It had nothing to do with syphilis or anything like that. Anyone who knows about horses know that they twitch. And if you come running over to one and grab it by the snout, the very first thing that the horse will do will jerk. And have you ever seen the size of a horse's head and think of the bone in there? Mm. That's like being hit by RSJ. So the poor man probably had was hit. And at the time in the furore, he doesn't think. It's like when you could be really badly hurt and you're not aware of it till later. I think he had something that damaged his brain at that point. But getting back to the point, it's his duplicitous sister who used to sit him up like a whore in a window and sell him to the public at that time when he was deranged. And she is the one who first wrote works, her and her husband. They were such foul characters, They tried to set up a proto-fascist organization in South America. And when that didn't work, the two of them came back to Germany, right? And then start producing literature of a sort of a Nazi, proto-Nazi complexion. And with Friedrich Nietzsche's name nicely, involved in that whole game. So this is the origin of it. Friedrich Nietzsche was already out of his mind. And if you go back to his work and actually read some of his thoughts on Germany, you'll see that immediately how preposterous the whole thing is.
Have you read the works of Carroll Quigley, the author of Tragedy and Hope and The Anglo-American Establishment?
Yeah, I've read both of those, and in a third book that sort of condenses it by an author I can't remember the name of. That's a good book because it condenses, the main parts. And it's
Tragedy and Hope 101 by Joe Plummer.
Yeah, that's the one.
That's really good.
It is good. Yeah, there's again, he is another one we should include, Carroll Quigley, because that would be number 5. He is the one who originally opened the door, and look at the eminence of this guy, right? I mean, you can't get any more eminent. Who first started to speak about round table groups in the verbatim. I'd say probably John Coleman is next in eminence because he was a member of MI6. But Carroll Quigley is mentioning the British establishment, the Anglo-American establishment. And I'm still to do reams of work on this because I'm trying to synthesize all of the people we've been talking about, right, with that mixture of my own thought on it. Because remember, every single teacher we're talking about, I don't commit to 100%. It would be too lengthy to go into why. I mean, it's obvious. Any scholar is not going to buy, I'm not the first to be like that. You can really identify, even with Ayn Rand, I've got, problems with a lot of her philosophy, how she didn't really do so much as she should have on psychology, or a little bit dismissive of Immanuel Kant, for instance. There'll always be things, right? And just because I haven't ever iterated these things in my career, people think, well, you just cut and pasted then from that person. All I could do, I'll just pick up that book then and it'll all be in there. Well, be my guest, go and find that out. And people, to their shock, find out that there's, it's not as simple as that, right? But for certain, these are important figures because it's all important to understand the roots of America, that although a war of independence was fought, independence was not actually won. I don't know who has said that, say Americans said, we're always famous for the wars we're really famous, us Americans, for losing the wars we win. Yeah. A lot of wisdom in that. I don't know if it was Chuck Norris who said it or whoever, but it's absolutely true, or it was Bo Gritz. But the thing is that it's the same thing in terms of the War of Independence. It's the same thing as with the wall falling down in 89, 90, whatever. The wall may have fallen down, mate, but communism didn't fall down. So, double take there, right? Well, same in America. A war of independence was fought, but a war of independence was not won. And the war still goes on, and lucky were those Eustace Mullinses, who were instructed by an Ezra Pound. Lucky were those G. Edward Griffins who stumbled upon it in whatever way, and that's still going on. There's nothing changed. Modern conspiracy theorists of the American side who read these Stanton Evans, who read these wonderful people, and even your Pat Buchanans are in there, but there's so many other authors we could mention, Dan Smoot, Senator Gary Allen, right? You will discover that fact for yourself, that it was not won. And that the war of real independence, has been carrying on, but that the British systems, and they're not just British either. I'm not, not indicting the average British person. This is a global black nobility, what I call the Black Lodge. Their center is in London, but that doesn't stop them having epicenters everywhere else. And one of them is right there in New York with your CFR headquarters, right? So that's the instruction. So Yuri Bezmenov, absolutely. A G. Edward Griffin, absolutely. We need instruction, right, from the people who are going to give you that tutorial on who is the enemy, where's their names and addresses, what historical filth have they done, like you say, with the Dulles brothers, the assassination of Joe McCarthy and many, many other great people who tried to stand up, and they're still professionally assassinating us now. through social media, shadow banning, by messing with your numbers and hits and everything else. And if these people actually are dumb enough to think that they can stop a guy from Northern Ireland from doing anything just because he's banned on social media, I know they're deranged. I'm on the right side. You must be stupid. I must know more about human psychology than you do. Whoever told you could ever stop a guy from Belfast because you're going to ban him on social media? He's going to give up and run away and hide. Is that your estimation of a man like myself? I know I'm on the right side. You going to stop at Joe McCarthy and Ezra Pound? The man went through 11 years in Bellevue Mental Asylum. Didn't slow him down. We're bulletproof, mate. Face it.
Now, do you think there were important intellectual contributions made by George Mason, Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, who are referred to as the American founders, or do you think that that was more of just a bait and switch sort of how we could really trick them, give them a vote between two of us once every 4 years, then they'll really buy into this. Well, what are your thoughts on the philosophy of the American founders? All men are created equal, right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, those sorts of things.
Yeah, what a question. Brilliant, brilliant, Keith. My real instinct after years of studying it is the latter, that it's mostly a bait and switch and a bunch of duplicity. How on earth would you back that up to a patriotic American and then say that, well, you're calling yourself a patriotic American, now you're knocking all the Constitution? Yeah, and I went on a labyrinthine study before I did it. And along the way, I met, guess what? Nicholas Hagar. There's one of an eminent name for you. Right. And Nicholas Hagar, probably without going as far as I've gone, goes pretty much, I use him as my main, source there. And then adding to what he doesn't say is this, because you can find a Nicholas Hagar page on my Irish Origins site, I think, and that'll help people. I add to it this, and that is the world is run not just by the right brain, but by the left brain, not just run by reality, but the word of the reality, right? In fact, even did a recent article called In Words We Trust, which also goes into this concept. And that is that you can have all the highfalutin words about a thing, but unfortunately the word is not the thing. And so you're quite right, when it's sort of a bait and switch, an idea came to the heads of people who really worked for these British structures that we're talking about. Some of those people had an ambivalent relationship with their masters, there's no doubt about that, but they're still criminals in my eyes, although they may have had fallings out and pillow fights. You're still you're not really for freedom as you appear to be. What you are is for the word freedom and the impact that word would get. Or, there's a thing I did called the Declaration Deception, in which it was discovered through this wonderful photography that they have now, that underneath the very word citizen, right, on the Declaration of Independence, actually still there, visible to not the naked eye, but to this instrumentation, is the word subject, which was crossed out, as it were, and the word citizen, a more pleasant word. Yeah, and as I said earlier about some people go, oh, that's fine then. They just made a correction and they rubbed it out. We do that every day. But I've got a brain that actually sort of in the Sherlock Holmes mode goes, could we rewind and tell me, what? Would men who really had worked for 40, how many years did they work to write that document? And then right at the very last draft, write in the word subject, which is, used by the Queen and all the royals. That's how they're still thinking up until the moment of the writing of the Declaration of Independence. I'm worried about that. That does keep me awake. It might be an accident, just like, the detractor will say, but it may not be. And then if it is not, then look what we've got phenomenologically. We've got evidence of deception right in front of us, which is why I call that little program, the Declaration the Declaration Deception. It's been shadow banned. It's still on YouTube, but you have to put my name in and search for it. So that and many other things, and then a much more robust study showed me that it's mostly a sham. And that's why, do you see that in the movement of America, it's always been going in the wrong direction? Forgive me if I'm wrong, but when your first step is pointing in the wrong direction, probably you're not going to get to the goal that you thought of. So the deception is often in its induction. Where it led is almost the proof of the original, precept. So yeah, and I've written on that. They can see my article called Constitution Con that's on the Michael Tsarion website. And I'm not saying that everyone needs to believe it. I'm just laying out what evidence I can find. And it still doesn't mean that the Constitution isn't a working document. right? And if it was blended with the Articles of Confederation, or some sort of, update of the Confederation, and then with the Bill of Rights, look, I'm still for it, I'm still okay. But at the same time, as I say, digging down deep into its, the real complexion of it, look, it is parchment idolatry. It is the love of words, which words is not the thing. And that has to be understood. You cannot tell me that, if I say carrot, that the word is the same thing as a carrot, right? A donkey ain't going to believe you anyway. I can bet you on that. The donkey knows the difference. Why don't
How
we?
now? How about the work of G. Edward Griffin? What'd you learn from him?
Yeah, you can't even imagine. He was, when I got to America for my longest stay, I had several shorter stays in the 80s. When I got there in 91, it was about Desert Storm. So I start getting into, Reverend Jack Moore, into Father Chick and not Father Chick, but the Reverend Chick. And I got into Lord Davis, right? And some of these Christian thinkers, Eustace Mullins and so on, right? And as I was studying, then one of the big names in the movement, as you're trying to find books and you're trying to find tapes, was Ed Griffin's work, right? And his stuff on the Federal Reserve. This was one of the big detergents for doubt, because even in the early stages, I still had doubt, right? Even though I was fairly committed to the study, and after coming out of Ireland, I didn't need any kind of, acculturation moment to study conspiracy. It was what I saw with my Marxist father, and, just stuff in the streets of Belfast, newspaper propaganda, whatever, right? I was already sort of inured to it. But still, whatever sort of little bit lingering doubt is there, mostly from the voices of other people. By the time you've read Ed Griffin and men of that caliber, it's all over me, right? If you read Stanton Evans and these people, right, it's all over. You are a different category now. There's no doubt about it. Because they have the citations, from the son of FDR, from the daughter of this and the cousin of that and the uncle of that, confirming it. Because they've done their homework. They've been to the Library of Congress, and they've done their work. And so he is one of the most thorough writers. He was also a filmmaker who made many, many, many videos. And the videos are so controversial that everyone else in America is dropping it, not talking about it, but he did. And so those, like the Capitalist Conspiracy, but he made 6, 7, 8, 9 others. Yeah, second to none, really. Very, very high on the list.
Yeah, he was great. I love when he was. It's so funny seeing him as like this young guy in a suit and tie talking about how communists will infiltrate America using, riots on the streets where people would then justify the police state they otherwise would not have, which is going to be run by the same communists that are supporting the rioting and the looting and the
No,
terrible chaos. And he's like reading the own words of like the strawberry incident, I think is the name of one. Or, I mean, just think of the primary documents. He cites Frank Vanderlip, one of the guys in the meeting at the federal or at J.P. Morgan's house on Jekyll Island. It's like I never even thought to let's look for the primary sources. I just thought, all right, the teacher tells a story, I parrot the story, that's history. It was never even introduced until I came across his work.
and do you know that he did a video on the black movement and how we think BLM is new, right? Now go to Ed Griffin's, socialism videos, and you'll see one that tears meticulously into how disenfranchised black people were used by the Communist International to undermine, the sovereignty of America. See, I'm not against a lot of the ideologies of oppressed peoples or even women or whatever it might be, but I am against the lengths which these subgroups went to in order to, make their point or, get equality, actually de-equalized the whole of America. So, hey, if you got, I love Mary, Godwin, or she's more well known, Mary Shelley, and I can read liberals. Some of my greatest mentors in their early lives were very, liberal in that sense. So it's not something that I have a case against. It's just that I do have it that when you form an institution to help you, you form an order that then has so much of a destructive effect on the body politic, on mainstream, that you're no longer assisting. You're actually now undermining. And it's so strange that in the 21st century that has to actually be iterated. In fact, half this that we've seen since Trump got an election, I'm still working out why do we have to explain any of this to anyone in the whole wide world. They're so basic, and yet the reset is reset back to zero. reset back to imbecility.
And very similar, Eustace Mullins. What are some contributions of his?
The main one was that through him you find out about Ezra Pound. He actually did write a whole biography on Ezra Pound. It's a really good book called A Difficult Individual. Now, I had heard about Ezra Pound from his influence on dozens of the more famous people like T.S. Eliot, Ernest Hemingway, and dozens of others of the world's greatest poets. He is actually behind it. He was actually James Joyce. Can you believe it? And many others of that ilk wouldn't have been who they were. I mean, this is absolutely definitive. Would not have been who they were to change world history without Ezra Pound, who himself was anyway a far greater literary genius than they were. But one of his jobs was to help these younger men get published and so on. So I don't know when I first got into Ezra Pound, but the fact that I can't remember the exact details, but when I got to America after the 90s, start reading this man. See, remember, the skeptical side of me is looking for proofs as I'm going through this work. I'm not completely dead and believing. So that little level of observation is still operating to see, can I believe this? Or, where's this corroborated? And when I found out that Eustace Mullins was the disciple and protege of Ezra Pound, we're on a good track here of confirmation. America's greatest poet, look it up. That's what it says. And then same thing I would do when I was looking at the Lyndon LaRouche material. Here's a bunch of Marxists. Originally, they've sort of gone through a chameleon change. And I like a lot of their work. His Webster Tarpley's, his Jeffrey Steinberg's. I like a lot of their work, but I'm looking for corroboration. I'm not just buying it wholesale like a lot of their audience did. The corroboration was in their details about the British royal family that most Americans don't know anything about, or the House of Hanover, or the houses of the Black Venetians in Italy. I know all of this stuff because I've been learning it, growing up in Britain. So when the Lyndon LaRouche crowd, for all their faults, are still being very accurate about these royals, that's a very strong sense of corroboration that it would be wasted on an American, but it's very attractive to a man like me going, he's right there. All these alpha lodges of Freemasonry, absolutely, they're telling the truth. So, so that gives you, it endears you to that group. Not wholly, I never commit wholly, but it's very, very good research-wise to say, oh, look at these guys. This is, Dope Incorporated. Just read that book and tell me if there's one false line in it. There probably is, but as I'm saying, and then generally, the preponderance of the information is marvelous, despite other, worries about their origin being highly Marxist and whatever. Yes, but see, I'm a very open-minded person. It doesn't matter to me that the guy is a Christian or the guy is, an ex-Marxist or whatever. I'm looking at the material and I'll make up my mind. That's what I've done even with normal, literati, let alone the things that you come across in the more alternative movements.
You said you came to America during the first Gulf War. Are you familiar with the babies and incubators lie that Hill and Knowlton gave to this girl who was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador? At the time, do you remember seeing that and thinking, I'm going to have to look at that? It sounds like a fantastic story. Or at the time, were you just like, oh, that's horrible, we should go in there?
No, I knew the whole story. The Kuwait is absolutely ridiculous. It shouldn't have even existed. It's a stitch-up job from the British royal family, who own Dutch Royal Shell. What we know as Shell gas stations is run from Dutch Royal Shell. And they're a conglomerate. There's other very powerful groups involved in Dutch Royal Shell, but the supreme head of it is the Queen of England. So wherever that family has placed they're not British, right? You can trace them back a long way, but I would prefer to think of them as the House of Hanover, like average Scottish people do, right? They're the House of Hanover, the House of Orange. What a gang. What a gang of mass murdering psychopaths, right? So wherever that gang puts its foot in the territories that they own, there's going to be trouble. So the pillow fights that they have are legendary. My work does focus on that and will continue to do so. So no love of Saddam Hussein or any of those fanatics, but at the same time, Kuwait was part of Iraq. It was part of the greater Persian Empire and all of that. So as was, Palestine, Israel, all of that. All of these things are artificial. Okay, so Kuwait was artificial, and then the lady you just spoke about retired to 1 million, 140 acres of, just along with what's his name, the Secretary of State at that time, Why does his name escape me?
James Baker.
Baker. She worked for him. Others did. They all retired to sumptuous, positions, monies for leading this. Not that the press is independent anyway, but that thing was made for TV, and it was one of the first simulacrums. Taking it from Baudrillard's side, where it's smart weapons and all of that. That was the first iteration of what Baudrillard had predicted would be coming. I think not predicted, he had predicted it, and Baudrillard actually commented on Desert Storm as being a virtual war. It wasn't boots on the ground as people thought. It was one of these peculiar simulacrums, which he predicted would be, he said that the civilization was going in that direction, and boy, was he right.
Yeah, and I remember hearing, I think there was something like the Patriot bomb where, people were bragging about how many Iraqi soldiers. And as much as, I'm against soldiers aggressing against, innocent civilians, I looked into it, and Greg Hartley, who would interrogate Iraqi soldiers, they were virtually all conscripts, which is code for slave, basically forced labor. So, I mean, that's so sad. Do you see that there is a conscious effort to get people desensitized and to strip them of general empathy they otherwise would have if they weren't so busy justifying the crimes of the evil tyrants who like to rule us?
That's been going on for a longer time. That's part of the bigger, broader conspiratorial movement, right? And the psychological talking to some of the higher groups, because a lot of what we've been saying works on the political and quasi-political, constitutions and and even the division of these countries that we just spoke of. That's geopolitics. What you've just addressed now is the little bit broader, Fabian movement of the whole gnawing away at Western civilization that we started with, and by the way, just a point with Meet the Press, when both, just one anecdote about that is that when both Bush and Kerry were interviewed by Tim, his name I can't remember, Tim Riffat, right?
Russert.
I think his name, huh?
Russert.
Russert.
Yeah.
And he asked him about the skull and bones. They both sniggered. You could see the. Did you remember that?
I saw that they were
They were laughing and sniggering, yeah, in this foul satanic laughter. It looked like Satan and his dog were standing behind him when they did it too. It was so hideous.
And then Russert was like 3-2-2. What's that mean? Not sure.
Like
he goes,
they're going to tell him.
Oh yeah, and then he goes, the conspiracy theorists are going to go wild. It's like we can't get a win with you guys ever. They're part of a secret society where we have primary documents by the Hoover Institute.
Yeah, like Sir John DeCamp and Ted Gunderson said, watch the butterfly. They're wearing the butterfly, the women are, or they're wearing symbols of satanic societies and child abduction societies, these Madeleine Albrights. And what does he have to do? Wear a big pyramid on the front of his head? Yeah, the cognitive dissonance. But coming to your question about the overall Orwellian plan, Erich Fromm is probably the one who said it best. In the past, we were slaves. In the future, we'll be robots. And so the idea is not to make a machine that will rise up in some H.G. Wells vision, where machines, right, will be running in the world for humans. That was thrown out in the 60s. You had the best minds on it. Who was the guy who was the head of cybernetics? These Ray Kurzweils and others, and all these cybernetics guys. They ran up against a wall. It wasn't going to happen. Hubert Dreyfus and other people who exposed this. They found out by the beginning of by the end of the 60s, that's not the way to go. So they quietly flipped it and really bit down on the Orwellian idea. You got to reduce the man, the human being, to the robot. That's what our plan is. And then subsequently went into doing that, billions and billions. And you can see subliminally, if you look at your Star Wars types things, this thing has been implanted in popular culture in innumerable ways that you probably wouldn't first notice, like these movies of Back to the Future and all. We don't want to go there, but so the idea is that has absolutely been happening, and I think that that's been more than successful. And since my focus is mostly on that, that's why if I'm still an optimist, I have to check myself every morning on that one. It's a bloody miracle. I think I still am, but it really pushes it to be an optimist. Look at the addiction to the words that we mentioned earlier. We are addicted to the word. That's why you have your Anthony Robbins. That's why you've got your Obamas. That's how they can succeed, right? Through the power of the word, not because of the power of the real thing. So there's an addiction going on that is already showing this regression into the swamp or into the semiotic. And I've come at that from a different way through female psychology work, but you don't even have to have that as the header. This is a feminization on a mass scale. That's not to indict any female, because the female is the victim of this as well. I mean feminization in terms of typology, right? And both males and females are in, they're in extreme danger, DEFCON 1 danger because of this. And it can be reversed, but and also the way of America in its essence is to reverse it. But first we have to get off, all of the different hands that are pushing the heads down into the swamp.
How about the work of Neil Postman?
Yeah, I've still got to do Postman's great work. I've got it on the shelf. So I can't say too much about that right now, but one of the biggest, again, a very eminent source. So just, again, an eminent source whose work is not original. All right. There's others who went into this before him, but the critique is essential. And the focus, the forum is America specifically. So it's wonderful.
And how about the work of John Coleman?
Well, John, his work can never be, criticized, because he was an ex-member of MI6 who left them, out of a conscientious objection to what they were doing in South Africa. So his books, Diplomacy by Deception and the Committee of 300, right, are crucial because they help bring a vast body of knowledge that you won't find in any other place. The closest probably would be Anthony Sutton, right? But I still think that John Coleman, being from Britain and having the inside scoop on the British organizations that we mentioned, is essential. He's a very good speaker as well. His lectures are excellent. And I would say that he's addressing the black nobility. Mm-hmm. My goodness, there's so little on them. So in that regard, I'd have your Carol Quigley's, I'd have your John Coleman's, your Lyndon LaRouche group, for the black nobility. My work is, I think, extended theirs actually, so yeah, people need to look into that. And also to a degree, Eustace Mullins, who's written his book, The World Order, right? The World Order, it's one of many of his books, but get that one if you're interested in the black nobility issue, and many others I could name.
All right. Anyone else? I'm trying to think of, who I've seen you cite in the past. I'd like you to comment on either George Orwell or Aldous Huxley. They're one of those that I see quotes of all the time, but I've never actually picked up their books and read. So how about George Orwell and Aldous Huxley? Anything you learned from them?
Yeah, well, see, George Orwell's books, 1984 and Animal Farm, are actually taught in school, or were, might be the operative word, in Britain. That was it. There's all sorts of books that these were compulsory. You're not going to get around it. If they didn't pick one book that one year, they'd pick it the next. And I think for a short time in American schools, they did too. But the thing is, that's probably all knocked on the head, right? So yeah, here's those conspiracy nutters, right? Look, once upon a time, all kids in all schools in England were, taught those books, and H.G. Wells as well, and so on, right? So British sci-fi is absolutely jam-packed with stories about, future world, global villages, The Prisoner, Blake 7, Doctor Who. I could go on. Even Space 1999 had issues, had covered that. And it actually goes on. Equator Mass. The bulk of it is talking about this. And so they've left no stone unturned. In fact, some of them were so futuroid that they actually did talk about brain implants that would prevent you from rebelling against Big Brother. That later on you're getting picked up by, famous filmmakers in America with your Equilibriums and, and your Stanley Kubricks or your Francis Ford Coppola's, with the THX and all of that. Look, it had all been done in British sci-fi, right? And in literature like C.S. Lewis and George Orwell. So this was a group of anti-socialists who, because of their eminence, right, and because of their position, don't forget, as young men, they were socialists. They were in at the ground floor of the origin of the Fabian Society, which already puts them ahead of the general public. So while you're watching Coronation Street and other shash, These guys were in there knowing, what the agenda of the BBC was, what the agenda of, the Observer magazine and all of it. They were following it, and they were seeing these Fabians constantly being employed in the top positions, being seated all around. And so they're the ones that you go to discover that if you're looking at little instances, right, of conspiracy, but you'll lose the overall picture. And if you go to the big picture, you won't remember the actual individual names or institutions or organizations involved. So these Orwells and all help you gain, so you ask what I learned. It's like I gained the right perspective at the canvas, that it's completely fluid. And that all my friends and colleagues, all these co-students that I've run into in America, none of them were doing that. They were either right up against it, right? Or they were way too far back, right? But that didn't, and then they stuck there for the rest of their lives. And I kept moving back and forth, and they thought I was incorrigibly ambivalent. But actually what I was doing was thinking, right? And I knew I hadn't read, 2 books is not enough. So 3 books, 4 or 5, 600, 6,000, right? And go on to really get to where I am now. In other words, I went for the long haul, which is something almost nobody in society does today. I went for the long haul. I put my faith in the long haul, as opposed to these episodic, yes, eureka moments when I've got it, only to keep finding out, no, here's somebody who contradicts that, So it was a tremendous journey. That's why I call it labyrinthine, because in psychology, philosophy, and alternative subjects that we're talking about, I did that. I wouldn't settle. I kept looking at, where's the opponent to this? What's the counter argument?
I ran through a number of other articles on your site that I'd like to go through. What was the forgotten slave trade?
Oh, well, I mean, that's just, there's many areas of that. You either dealing with the Arabic one, because Arabs' conquest was vast. The wild nomads of the north. But, don't ever forget that you just need to look at a map of the Arabian conquest, as it moved through the north of Africa and all over areas. And so the habit there, and it wasn't just with them, the Vikings had it before them. Did you know that Dublin wasn't even a city? It was founded by the Vikings, and it was a slave city. There wasn't nothing there but one house standing there until the Vikings came in, right? And it was a slave port. It wasn't the only one that they had. So white slavery dates from the Vikings. The whole of Ireland has, look, listening to me, no, abducted by the young St. Patrick, was abducted from Ireland, all the rest of it, right? Came back later in his life and everything like that for the conversion. Well, the Arabs were into it, wherever, and the Moors were into it. They're Islamic, but a small group of Jews who served the Moors really had no choice ultimately, also worked in the slave trade. Now, anti-Semites just focus on that, and that's it. But it's much broader, right? Yes, some Jews were involved, and they were dastardly to do that. But behind them was the whole Islamic movement. Glad that's over, right? Yeah, thing of history, right? Well, know what you're dealing with, because it's coming back.
And you mentioned a number of times on your site that Islam actually is a threat that the West should be worried about. What evidence or reasoning do you have to justify the idea that we should generally look at Islam as threatening to civilization, peace, harmony, property rights, and freedom?
Well, that's just pure history. Now I don't have to add one, personal comment. You just go and study the history of Spain under the Arabic, as I said, invasion of Europe, and so on and so on and so on. A good part of that would be even if you want to start later days, then go and study the dynamic between Byzantium and the Mongol horde. It's called the Golden Horde. Look it up, just Golden Horde. This, of course, would be Genghis Khan, right? And the movement, this is 1300s, so it's around the time of the Black Death. So you can start at a reasonably late period in history, right? And then work your way back to the original Arabic invasions, which are much earlier. They're going back to the 6th and 7th century. So this is already, Muhammad's just died around 5 something, and the guy isn't even cold. And before the Arabs are moving to conquer every single place. The butchery of women, children, and men, wholesale, right? You thought Attila the Hun was bad, right? And the Huns later became Christians, but they were obviously pagans before that. Yeah, but look. Genghis Khan and his hordes, and then Suleiman the Great, and on it goes, right? Every one of these leaders just wanted to butcher and murder and did so. So, the awful, and also they got to, yes, it was mainly faux pas and idiotic decisions within Christendom that allowed them to get this far. Kings hating king would not join in a concerted effort to push back the horde. They left it all to Ivan the Terrible, who's already demonized in history, or they left it to Vlad the Impaler, who's been demonized in history. These were great heroes of the period. But when they called out for other monarchs to join them, well, they got about 2.5. Yeah, two kings and a dog arrived, to push back the hordes. It's actually a fact. Henry the Lion and one other guy. But the great monarchs of Europe, like Charles V or whatever, Charles II, whatever it was, can't really remember right now, they didn't join in the fight. And actually, in many ways, were, sort of in collusion with the Islamic hordes. So, in order to win territories. And that story will come out when you look into Orthodox Christianity, why the Russian Orthodoxies, they hated the papacy and the papacy hated them. In the dynamics in Italy between the houses of Venice and the houses of, say, Florence, why that conflict existed is all based in this. And when you look at then the larger movement, right? Then it crops up again later in history, more moving up to the time of the First World War with the Ottoman Empire, which fell. Well, wait a minute, so it's a reiteration of the same thing. Wherever these Turks are, the reason why the Ottoman Empire fell is because it was run by Islam, right? So no matter what conquest these Islamics made, whether it's into whatever country, right, they fail except for one thing. They tax the Jews and they tax the Christians. And they use the artisanship of those two groups to keep their cultures alive. So what you know as Islam is the biggest farce of window dressing you've ever seen. And every presentment of culture that they have is largely bogus. With exceptions, right? The calligraphy, certain of the Sufi poets, which I know through and through, I've studied them all my life, and it has one of the biggest impacts on my life are the great Sufi poets. But then there's an ambivalence right there, because some people say that the Sufi mystics were only, keeping a facade of being into Islam. So, they may not actually be representative of Islam. There's that whole story, right? But just back to the point. When you see that no Islamic country, I don't care who and what they are, could not, in their inception, exist without the taxation and the enslavement of Jews and Christians, with their intellect and their progressiveness and their craft, kept sustaining those groups. And the next part why they exist to this day is because they became westernized. So Saddam Hussein, right? If you look at all the potentates that came at the end of the empire, these great Muslim empires, say in Iraq or Iran, it's only because now they've adopted a few Western traits that they then continue to survive in the appalling, Ayatollah Khomeini, right? I mean, even then it's backward. Even then it's oppressive. Even then it's murderous. But they can just sustain themselves by Western elements. And the Western man, in his degeneracy, has got the biggest cognitive dissonance over this. He refused, no matter how many people come online to talk about this, some of them extremely eminent, right? Like Robert Spencer and many others. Nobody is reading it. Nobody wants to know. Philip Haney and God knows what. So many people I could mention, many of them from inside Islam itself, who converted. So the journey goes on to expose this monster. And one last thing to say is, for those who believe in a Jewish conspiracy did it all, always remember that the Ottoman Empire was top heavy with Jewish people. Right? They're called the Young Turks, or, there's other names. But some of the richest Jews that ever existed in the world, that even you'd think that even some of your Rothschilds and all, look pale in comparison to, really, it's funny to say that because people just don't believe it, lived in Salonika, and other towns and cities within the Ottoman Empire, which fell. Anybody see a kind of a glaring contradiction here? Jews are responsible for the world conspiracy, right? But an empire in which they were almost the chosen few fell with all those billionaire Jews. Yeah. Keep going, mate. Come on. And they wouldn't even have an answer for you. So, you have to, it's ridiculous. Half the stuff written in the conspiracy world, is really appalling scholarship, actually. My part of my work is to go through it and show those errors.
And it serves the skeptics so well because they could say conspiracies don't exist. Let me show you about the Loch Ness monster. Oh my God! First of all,
There you
that doesn't
go.
even meet the definition of a conspiracy. Let me tell
No.
you about psychics and astrology and Hitler's brain flying in a UFO, that
Yep.
sort of thing. So it just fits the narrative. Speaking of narratives, the uh, probably one of the most popular groups in America now is Black Lives Matter. The general narrative they have is not from the start of America, 1619, blacks were brought over here against their will. Enslaved, have been severely mistreated. To this day, we see nonstop racism to the point of murdering them. This all stems from American racism. BLM is therefore a justified organization to intimidate us until the point where blacks are equal to whites. What are your thoughts on this narrative?
Yeah, it's absolute nonsense. Um, any injustices that were ever done against that group or any other group have long been made up for in the past, right? So that's my answer to that. They're an extremely privileged group. I don't see any evidence of any systemic racism anywhere. But what I do see is that the BLM and their socialist supporters are the fascists, are the oppressors. Everywhere they step in the name of equality, know that word, they create inequality. So that thing has been exposed thoroughly by your Thomas Sowells and many other black writers who I love and I feature on my blog, right? And it doesn't carry 1 ounce of credibility, especially as we move up into modern times. It's the same bugbear that they try to use, the IRA about, nationalist groups in Ireland being the oppressed, being the underdogs, and then anyone who's lived amongst them knows that when they were given beautiful flats and beautiful districts, they came out at night and smashed them up so that the cameras of the world would think of them as oppressed. Aye, let's start with that, right? Where no matter what you did for these people, they threw it back in your face. They damaged their own environments because their whole premise is the narrative is threadbare and only goes on by the window dressing of looking like you're oppressed, accusing everybody else, the white man and everyone else, and seeing how many people you can gather from some campuses, to buy into that narrative. It's so utterly pathetically transparent that I'm amazed that Americans haven't seen through it. It just tells you that they've been watching too much I Love Lucy or Melrose Place or Baywatch or whatever the modern versions of those may be. I'm talking about what I used to watch in the 90s, right? Or not watch. So, there's the modern versions of it. So it's awful, right? And none of that is educational. How rich TV could be, to go the other way. But of course, we know that that's a moot point. And then Americans don't read, all right? Maybe a bit more now than before. So of course, these lies are going to percolate because these groups are billionaires. They're controlled from KGB Central, which is, very, very powerful. And you've got to realize that 80% of what you see on a Facebook or is coming straight from KGB International. You've got to understand that. That'll make sense. So when you see some cops kicking the shit out of somebody, yeah, that was filmed in Moscow, mate. Do you know how easy it is to get a police uniform and put an American number plate on the car, which just happens to be inside of the camera? Shall I go on? Well, you do have to go on because the American too. Whoa, that really happened, right? I mean, that level of easy control without you knowing about how Soviet propaganda worked and still works, because it says the wall may have come down, but no, the propaganda machinery continued. Even the Vatican get in on it. There's things that have happened, right, to form the socialist papacy. It's called socialistic Catholicism, right? Or Christian socialism is what it's called. You've got Islamo-communism. You've got things that have come up in the 90s after the so-called great events of liberty took place that captured your attention on screen. David Hasselhoff singing on the Berlin Wall, half drunk, and the Scorpions, We Are Love, or whatever it was, and everyone went for that. That's the spectacular you're meant to look at. Communism is breathing easy. Now we can move into the cultural version of it. Yeah, how many people even know about that? How many people know that socialism is fascism? We're down to baby steps here, mate.
Yeah, you can certainly see the agenda of, bourgeoisie versus proletariat, black versus white, man versus woman is the justification for, well, why should I give you guys, government, a ton of power and advocate you get more than $4 trillion a year? Well, there's this big evil problem that we have to solve. Oh my God, it is. We have to start rioting. So I did a little research because, that's just a theory I have about it. And it turns out that Roland Fryer, the black professor at Harvard, says blacks are 23.5% less likely to be shot by the police relative to whites. There's a paper by Washington State University. Police are 3 times less likely to shoot unarmed black suspects than white suspects. You have New York City University's John Jay College of Criminal Justice concluded that during the period ranging from May 2013 to April 2015, 49% of those killed by law enforcement officers were white, while only 30 were black, which is relatively in proportion to the amount of crime they commit. Examples like Duncan Lemp, Ryan Whitaker, Kelly Thomas, Daniel Schaefer, these are all on camera, by the way. So the idea that, well, it would make the news, but it's not on camera. No, Tony Timpa is suffocated to death on camera like George Floyd was. 2019, police killed 41 unarmed people. 9 were black, 19 were white. So if you hear about a story, it's because they want you to hear about it, not because it's just in something that happens and the media is forced to report on it. And then finally, as far as blacks being oppressed, black on white violent crime, 547,000 incidents where the black is the aggressor, and white on black crime is about 60,000 cases a year. So black on white crime is like 20 times higher than white on black, which, by the way, I care about the violence, not the demographic. Female violence is much higher than female on male. I'm not just playing to my group here.
Yeah.
I'm saying, I'm sorry, this is a con. Please step out of the BLM movement and let's start cleaning up the cities here.
Yeah. And
Final
understand that
thoughts. Yeah.
and understand that they've had it before. The Black Panthers and the Weathermen and other groups related. 60 bombs were set off in 1965 in California alone, exceeding what we are even seeing in the streets today. Few statues could be put back up and will be. But this incendiary action has occurred in the streets of Paris, all across the world. It's nothing new. And one has to then, step aside, as you say, and then also start to look into their agenda. And there's wonderful people who were insiders, Heather McDonald and others who you should read. People can read contemporary women and men who were inside these movements and who make the job easy. My blog on Unslaved, it's a little picture blog there, has book lists for the last 3 years, 2019 and 18, extensive. Pick 2 of each list and get into it there, and you'll find black authors, you'll find ex-feminists. So yeah, it's not just all coming from one particular limited biased perspective here. We're dealing with truth, and that's just no one needs to defend that.
Exactly. And, I hate to, because people get very offended at that. And the reality is, if I had someone manipulating me or a spouse cheating on me, I would hate to hear it. But you got to know in the long run if you're getting played, because, as bad as it is to get played for 5 years and 1 day is worse, and 6 years and 7 years.
And one thing I must say,
yeah.
A great many of the books that you'll find on that list, not all, but a great majority of it, I'd say up to 80%, are eminent. Like we've been alluding to earlier on, they're eminent people. They're very, Hoover Institute, Charles Murray, people like that. So again, it's not just some junk I found in the corner of some weird bookstore, in the deep south or something like that. Far from it.
Yeah, I forget where Thomas Sowell, what university he worked at, but Glenn Lowry was the first black man to get tenure at Harvard University in the economics department. CNN can't get their hands on this guy to clear this up so we can stop the rioting. All right. How can you tell in a broad picture? How can you tell if someone is awake or asleep, psychologically speaking?
Well, you go by the maximum of Mark Twain that everybody's insane, and you try to look for the less insane person. Is one quick rule of thumb way to do it. I gave up in that time I told you about coming to America. It was about 89, right? Late 89. I quickly, in the years before that, and there wasn't many of those, but they were very impactful. 3 years seemed like 300 of the experience of what you're saying. And so I got off that plane almost like had a infected when you walk to a chamber, in one of these chemicals. What's it called? You're like, there's a beam comes down and you're just sort of disinfected of any particular, parasite you'd be carrying or whatever. I went through a period just like that. when it came to bothering about anybody else and their interests in this subject. And it was more like, you come to me, I don't go to you, and it changed in form
Mm,
because there were certain moments where I broke that rule, but it was very temporary. You're talking only maybe a few comments, maybe a day or two to a coworker or whatever. And and there's other reasons as well. I was doing so much physical study that there just wasn't even the time. And I had to kind of not do it because I knew, oh, this is going to take away for another hour or 2 hours or even a day of reading Gerald Massey or reading Carl Jung. So I just wouldn't do it. But right even from the earlier stage, what we did do is this. Because as we said, we're always in participation. We're always part of a mitweld. My friend and I, what we did was we would photocopy at our own expense, excellent sections from, say, Eustace Mullins. He was like one of our favorites, but there's many others as well. James Bogreitz, Nord Davis, as I say, the Reverend Jack Moore. Oh, and so many other people, and we would go and leave those around, or we'd pin them up, at a particular bookstore or whatever. So it wasn't that we were idiotically, confined to garrets doing this research. We did. We really put out all sorts of things. Just if a single phrase, maybe, would catch an eye, and we did thousands of those. And we put around actually Spotlight magazine, which was a newspaper. We'd buy extra copies. If a book really hit us that was like absolutely phenomenal, like Pawns in the Game, by Guy Carr, he was a captain. We would then, put those out. We'd buy 6 and 7 and give them out to friends. So we did this for many, many years. So although my general focus, and personal decision had been no time for it, no interest in it, I believe that I still met, until that was knocked on the head. We did our best to put literature around, and then also because then you're saying, okay, if this gets thrown in the trash, it gets thrown in the trash. If somebody picks it up, we've got one convert, So it was like that, and I think that was a lot healthier. I've never advertised, never advertised. I advertised one time for a thing that was which involved other people I was working with, whatever you call that, was a collaboration with other people. But for me and my own work, do you know what? I asked for, things like donations way at the end of my career. I'm like the last person to ever asked for it, and there's never been actually any advertising. Many, many people have always said me to do it, and I just won't, because I know my work is not for everyone, and it'll be a situation of, people will find me when the time is right.
who are the Medes? Medes.
Yeah, they were. Okay, to understand them, you have to understand the whole history of the Persian Empire, right? Because they're really related. It's the same thing with the Parthian Empire, which is monumentally important, and the expert on that is Ralph Ellis. But the Medes come in there too because they're very ancient. When the Persian Empire was original, it worshipped it didn't worship Ahura Mazda, which all Persians know about later on being the great Sun King and everything. It'd be like their sort of Jesus Christ figure. They worship Mithra, right, in the pagan days. And Mithra would be one of the oldest gods. The priests of Mithra would have been a solar cult. Jason Georgiani, who's an expert on all this, links them like I do to the Scythians. We totally agree on that point. And that's, to me, the most fascinating, because the identity of the Scythians is also earth-shattering, and they changed the earth, they changed the world, they changed even British history. People wouldn't believe that. Now, the Medes grow up. They're sort of north of the Persian Empire, right, near Parthia. And they really, to me, right, are not a race. They're not even really a tribe. They're more like a priesthood. And only duplicitously do we get, they're the Magi, right? And the Magi are more a cult. So in Egypt, right, in Chaldea, in Persia, in Babylon, in Acadia, the high stratification, same in Ireland, right? The stratification is Druid at the top, all-knowing Magi, and everybody else underneath. But the thing is, what would happen if, because of the absolute chaos and ambivalence and changes geopolitically within the lower structures of these groups, these races, that the priesthood somehow come together and form their own sovereign state? So to my thinking, that's what the Medes were. They were because so much change was taking place. in the Persian Empire, in terms of belief, excuse me, uh, even the Mongols were having a say. You can't think of an empire that went through so much change, right? Before it got where it ended up. So I really believe, in short, that the priestarchy, who are a cult, and they may not have even been a solar cult in the same way that, say, the Mithras guys were, and then the later Ahura Mazda, they may be in a stellar cult, my feeling. And they just happened, and this also buys into geography, because the latitude on which they're on, right, is also a key one for the stellar cult. The Silk Road, leading through. There's too much to go into now, but there's the very latitude on which Medea exists is indicative that this was a priesthood of the stellar cult. So, in other words, a very, very ancient, priesthood with connections to the Scythians, who were Arya, and to, the Finnish groups, and to even the Irish Scandinavian groups as well. So I think they were white, I think they were Caucasian, and they were the high magicians, who had been descendants from Atlantis. Their bloodline wouldn't have gone back to a specific country per se. That's the wrong way to read it, right? The Arya come from something past. Now, Tolkien knew about this, called it Numenor, Hyperborea, Ultima Thule, right? The extreme north. And that opens up the whole field then of the story of Atlantis, you see.
And you have done a lot of work on advertising. What are some ways or some tips that you could give the audience uh, so they could just keep it in the back of their mind and make sure they're not being irrationally manipulated by advertisers when deciding what to spend their money on or spend their time doing?
Yeah, that's a key question, because one of the ultimate ways to get into the subjects we're talking about is through the store. Because it's so unpalatable, politically incorrect, and controversial, I always suggest, or did, in the past, and still do in a way, that this is one of the royal roads for just a young teenager or whatever to get. Don't be listening to us talking about Persian empires and occult histories of Ireland and all. Study your Mars bars, study your Nestle, study the advertisements on TV and the billboards. That's the level you need to be on. Why so many meditation poses? What's that got to do with a big gulp or Pepsi, right? I'm losing it, right? Look at the uses of mirrors. You're talking about the subliminals, and take it from there, right? Right, and then read Brian Wilson Keyes, and read Gene Kilborn, and read what's his name, Media Virus, Douglas Rushkoff, and then come to my work, because go through the simple doors, easy doors first, and then come to the occult aspect of it, which they leave out, all those guys. But at least familiarize yourself with that, how words are used to entrain, how images definitely are, how light is used in advertising, and know the fact that you are indeed, watch the movie Agency with Robert Mitchum, and you will find out that you are indeed being manipulated in a very, very big way. And until that piece, you talked about Edward Bernays and people like that, until you are familiar with that aspect of the mind control, you're still pretty jelly. As much as your intellect may know things, you really haven't got, you're still manipulatable. You become ironclad. You become highly immune, what I call psychic immunity, when this piece is plugged in, because then they can't mess with you, because they are messing with you, and they do it in a very sophisticated way. So yes, I have Subversive Symbolism podcast. I've got a couple of articles. We have gone into that. And Age of Manipulation is like a mega work that I got the opportunity in Sweden to do 3 months. This thing would be over, a lengthy period of time back in 2010, and I went into the creme de la creme that I have, because even that time was short, so I packed. So people check out Age of Manipulation. It's on Unslaved. Oh my goodness. And there's other programs as well, but that one is really, really condensed, and talks about all the different satanic, symbolism and all of that.
Well, I forget how young I was, but I remember having a conversation where I was talking to someone who's very into, freedom, libertarianism, conspiracies, and he goes, Don't you love how they have the good-looking people smiling, drinking the beer, as if you want that, and they associate what you want with their beverage, so it just rents space in your mind. You're not
That's
going to
right.
go out and buy it, and now they see how much money they made off the ad. They're just letting you know that they're there and getting you to associate happiness, being in good shape, smiling, laughing with their product. And now I gotta say, I think it's fine that they do that in the same way when you're on a first date, you sort of make yourself appear to be better than you really
Of
are.
course.
The fact that we have that knowledge, once you have it, then you can't be manipulated. One of the things I recommend is a book, The Use and Abuse of Logic, How to Win Every Argument by Madsen
Mm,
Prairie. He just nails down logical
mm.
fallacies. Once you understand them, can't be manipulated by them.
I must look into that.
My final question for you is, what are some must-read books you would recommend to people? Anyone trying to think clearly, understand history, understand philosophy, any that come to mind?
So much does. I'd say right first off, philosophy, who needs it, and you can move from that point to the rest of her work. Then you must read the works of Nathaniel Branden, as a kickoff point, because they'll open a lot of other doors. After that, I would recommend the works of Erich Fromm, which are so pertinent. I'm thinking of stuff that's still pertinent today. His works are very, very important. Um, Boy, as soon as you're asked this question, it just all goes out of your head. And then I would dip into some of the books that we've talked about, from the Eustace Mullins and from John Coleman, and I would start slowly getting into those works, right? And if you want to come from the media side, which I've been doing since the 70s, it is one of the oldest studies I undertook, helped me enormously get into all of this other stuff, right? Then I would start with those books. I'd brush up on, Brian Wilson Key, uh, subliminal subliminal seduction and age of manipulation, right? The ones that he did, and move in that direction into your Douglas Rushkoffs, because this involves MTV, things that are familiar to you and palpable that you can help your kids and your neighbors with as well. A little bit less of the esoteric, because I could recommend a lot of books, but they take you off into psychology and philosophy, and we know that's only a very small demographic. So yeah, there's a lot of great books out there from these conspiracy writers, which are really compulsive reading. And many of them, the people that we've mentioned, also talk about American history. So what could be more interesting, like Pat Buchanan did and others have done? And again, if you go to my blog and type in MSAR book list, right, you'll get the three for the 3 last years. Use that as a base, because I'm mentioning not only writers from way back, but those lists really have contemporary writers on it as well, right? So try those. I think it's a really, really good start. And I made those book lists because I get questions like this. And so it's so difficult to do. And also people don't have a lot of time to read. So yeah, I try to hone the ones that I think would be the most palatable. And also the ones that give my audience the teeth then to do what I'm doing, which is go out to the next person and say, no, I'll shoot that down, mate. Right? So there's great writers, like you said, Neil Postman, Alan Bloom, but their work tends to be complex and intellectual. Okay, love it, but can we soften it a bit? And I've done that. I've gone and listed books that anybody can read. You can download them on Kindle. They come from all sorts of sources and works, walks of life, the authors, and they also contain the material that you can, immediately turn to some nutball that you're dealing with and win the argument. Shoot them down right there, and that gives you confidence as a reader and also as a person interacting with society today. I think it's much more palatable than some intellectual understanding, valuable as that is. I like to see my audience having the teeth to go out there and go, no, no, that's absolutely not true. Let me cite you a source, or let's talk about it and win the argument. That's vital today, since everybody wants to be doing that in the political arena. Then do it and win. That part of me says then, okay, go. It's not my way of doing things, but obviously everybody else would love to do it. So then they should know about these wonderful books, and they should be able to, glean some very, very powerful quotes from these great thinkers. And also, my real agenda is keep those thinkers' names alive. Ayn Rand isn't with us right now, Nathaniel Branden. So if you're reading their books, it's great, because I know you're going to go out there and write lyrics. I know you're going to write poetry. I know you're going to probably write your own book tomorrow, and those people's names. See, there's only two motives in my life. It's why I haven't advertised a lot. And they really are simple to understand. One is to keep the reputations and the names and the memory of the scholars we've talked about alive, the ones who passed away. And the other one is, the cries of the dead. I don't sleep well. I hear the cries of my brothers and sisters from previous ages. Why? Won't somebody tell me why I'm dying in the mines or in the fields of Passchendaele, right? Yeah. So I'm not too worried about humanity right now. I got other agendas, and it's only as a derivative thing, that my concern is with modern times and modern people and shaking the sawdust out of their ears. It's not my primary focus, but it is a focus, right? But it's a derivative one.
Well, Mr. Tsarion, thank you for spending 2 hours with me. It was very informative. In the description below, you will see not only links to unslavedmichaeltsarion.com, you'll also see the 3 links to his archived book list from 2018, 2019, and
Oh, good.
2020. I want to finish with this quote: "In order to rally people, governments need enemies. They want us to be afraid, to hate, so we will rally behind them. And if they do not have a real enemy, they will invent one in order to mobilize us." Thank you for watching, Keith Knight. Don't tread on anyone. Mr. Tsarion, thank you for your time.
Welcome, Keith. It's the best interview anybody's ever given me. So kudos to that, mate. We'll talk again.
Thank you.